From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul, mission control decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. It's always going to be a crazy week at this point, and we're always going to be over the moon. Just like a Russian craft.
When it ceases to exist.
Right. We're going to be okay. Well, like an Indian lunar lander, we are on or over the moon to share some stories from our fellow conspiracy realists. You are the most important part of the show. It is an immense privilege for us to be able to hang out with you together in the dark. We are going to hear some ideas about, we're going to have some much needed explanations about chavs, about smoking wet. We're going to hear some billionaire pranks. We're going to learn a little bit about life and death situations. We're going to hear some pretty solid pitches to explain certain UAP, formerly known as UFOs. And before we do any of that, we want to give a special shout out to a lot of our fellow listeners who had written in with updates on the Marion County newspaper raid and on a very troubling situation down in Australia. So maybe we start there. Maybe we start down south. All the way south.
Little Australia, indeed, home of the chavs. We'll get to that a little later. But this came to me from a listener who wrote me on Instagram and didn't give me permission to use their name, so we're just going to go with anonymous on this one. But it was in reference to, Matt, the story that you brought recently in a Strange News, I believe, episode about a case of mushroom poisoning that took place in Australia.
Just to clarify, Noel, it was when we were reporting on it, it was believed to have been a mushroom poisoning, right? Like nobody
Correct.
had confirmed at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And forgive me, the specific, Victoria is the province, I think they're called. Is that what they're called in Australia? It's a small town in Victoria. And this is a case where some food was prepared for a family picnic, and several individuals were sickened, and I believe 3 of them died. And there were some sketchy details surrounding this. Erin Patterson, who prepared this meal, was estranged from her husband. And that was kind of one of the details that led to a lot of speculation. Perhaps this was an intentional poisoning. Her husband at the last minute did not come to this meal, to this situation, this kind of camping kind of situation, I guess it was, if I'm not mistaken. And also, like, there was like a dehydrator that was found abandoned and things like that were in the reports that we, initially talked about that you brought, Matt. And now some new details have come to light, but also a listener wrote in on Instagram to send just some images of, this is a listener from Australia who sent some images of mushrooms that are commonly foraged in Australia, and just wanted to point out that they're, to the untrained eye, there's some similarities between a death cap mushroom and some other innocuous mushrooms, or mushrooms that might be, foraged in the wild to use for cooking. Like we do hear about people foraging for chanterelles and morels and all of that kind of stuff. It's, they're delicious. If you're a mushroom person, these are really tasty additions to cooking. If this is something that you are trained, at least at the very least, have a basic understanding of what these look like. Morels and chanterelles, very specific looking mushrooms. This listener wrote in and had a picture of quite a few different looking mushrooms, some of which pretty closely did resemble the death cap mushroom, which, as you pointed out, Ben, I believe on the Strange News installment, are not native to Australia, but have come there through, I believe, wood. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Through wood. We'll leave it at that. And so therefore now are, they do occur in the wild. Because initially I think I had said, wait a minute, they're not indigenous. That doesn't make sense. These must have been something that was imported or used. Erin Patterson, again, the woman who prepared the meal, has now been questioned and has made some statements, one of which was that she bought these mushrooms at an Asian supermarket. And there have been some reports that have come out from a couple of different media outlets that quote a forensic psychologist by the name of Tim Watson Monroe, who has been involved in some pretty high-profile cases there in Australia. And Mr. Watson Monroe identified several red flags in this case. I'm speaking to The Australian, so a major outlet there in Australia. And one of the things that he was quoted as saying in an article from the New Zealand Herald that I found is, I don't believe in coincidences. Rather, to quote precisely, I'm not a big believer in coincidences. And what he's referring to is the fact that Patterson's husband had a previous bout with serious food poisoning type symptoms. And I can't remember if we mentioned this. I don't think we did. I don't know that it had come out yet. But apparently was in a very, very bad way back in 2022. In fact, there are two cases that are cited in this article of gastric-related complications. The New Zealand Herald reports that Simon spent 21 days in intensive care after collapsing from a mystery stomach illness at his home, where his friends and family were told to come and say goodbye in case he died.
He was in a coma for a while.
Yeah, 21 days is a lot of time. That makes sense. That tracks. Did we have that info, Matt, back upon initially talking about this story?
No, some of the reporting was just about how he was estranged and how he had been sick in the past, but it wasn't like connecting it up. It does feel as though the investigation is attempting to make the connection between his previous illnesses and then this latest accidental or purposeful poisoning.
That's right. And Watson Monroe says as much, or basically says it's one or the other. Obviously, he says he was either willfully poisoned or it was just bad luck. But then again, that's, let's refer back to point one. Watson Monroe does not believe in coincidences in these kinds of cases. Red flag number two, as reported by the New Zealand Herald, Watson Monroe isn't convinced by Patterson's statement in which she claimed to have purchased the mushrooms at an unnamed Asian supermarket, because he said people just don't retail them. It's not that loose. So if this was like a supermarket of any scale, there are vendors, this stuff isn't just they don't sell foraged stuff at like Super H Mart, that's not a thing. Perhaps a farmer's market or something where you maybe have a stand with like the mushroom guy or whatever. We have that here in Atlanta. There's actually a really amazing mushroom person that sells foraged and I believe farm grown mushrooms at various farmers markets, around. And we're talking like, a little booth under, where you rent a space and you bring your stuff. A lot of like local and regional farms set up at these kinds of things. That is not what she reported. She specifically reported that it was at an Asian supermarket, and they don't have a name, so we don't know. But supermarket is definitely in there, and that to me implies some level of scale. And to Watson Monroe's point, tough to believe that something like this would just get in there. Another thing we didn't know that we talked about and questioned was what the dish was. And this is really interesting because I've made one of these before. Beef Wellington, which has a whole layer of mushrooms. Yeah. It's called a duxelle. It's basically you take a bunch of mushrooms, because mushrooms cook down, they're full of water. So
like
when
spinach.
When you cook down to get the amount of mushroom bits that you need to basically coat the puff pastry. This is a nice piece of beef tenderloin that's wrapped in puff pastry that is coated on the inside, usually with some kind of prosciutto or Parma ham, and then another layer under that has this mushroom mixture that you cook down, I think, with some red wine, and I think there's also mustard involved, but it's a lot. You have to cook down a ton of large mushrooms that you chop up tiny, and then it still makes a absurdly, reduced amount from where you started. So what a great way to make a highly concentrated thing. I mean, even you wouldn't have to have them all be these mushrooms. You could just mix a few of them in. These are very, very deadly.
Especially if you don't care about getting caught.
That's right. That's right. Another red flag, number 3, Patterson, again, I'm quoting from the New Zealand Herald piece. Patterson revealed in a follow-up statement to police that her children were not present at the lunch, despite initial reports that they were. And I cannot recall if in this story they were present. But I think that was the thing we were sort of questioning, where it's like, if her kids were there, that would sure as heck make it look less suspicious on her part in terms of the intentionality of it. And I believe in the reporting that we had, we put them there.
We did. Yeah, that was the initial reporting, was that the children were there eating a separate meal.
A separate meal, because we talked about kids don't like mushrooms. There was another claim that Patterson made, saying that the kids were at the movies, in fact, but that they ate the leftovers of the same meal the following day, that doesn't seem to line up, with what we'd heard, even in the initial reports, which probably, obviously initial reports, something like this. It's not an official investigation. This woman hasn't been compelled to make a statement at this point. There's a lot of conjecture going on. But there's a lot of conflicting things going around, and I think none of us were trying to try this woman, in the court of public opinion or anything. We made a couple of points that were, if this was unintentional, what a painful thing to go through, especially when the media is immediately casting aspersions on you, and to have reporters come into your door asking you about, a loved one who has died. I mean, the people that died were family, friends, or perhaps in-laws. I'm sorry if
It's her husband's family and
That's right.
her husband's mother's sister and husband.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. So that's red flag number 3. I'll just read one last little kind of wrap up from Watson Monroe. Seems like a smart fellow. Watson Monroe says police would be looking for points of weakness, and the slow, steady approach would be tactical, he said. It's a fascinating case. Everyone is talking about it. And then another last little detail. Another controversial part of the case is the details surrounding the dumping of a food dehydrator. Talked about that. That was definitely a detail that we had early. A police statement by Patterson was reportedly leaked to the media, revealing she became unwell after eating the meal. She admitted she then dumped a dehydrator she used to prepare the meal at a nearby tip, which was a word we weren't familiar with, but I believe, Matt, you found that that's a dumpster or like a Herbie Kirby kind of, trash hopper, right?
I don't know for sure. That's what I've read.
It's a trash receptacle.
It was a hot tip.
Yeah, exactly. At a nearby tip soon afterwards, because she was in a panic. That's super sus too, because she's trying to say, I was sick too. I panicked. But then later she admitted lying to police about how long ago she disposed of the food dehydrator. Initially saying that she put it there, quote, a long time ago, but then revealed that she did it immediately after everyone got sick. Also, we have reports saying that Patterson was a, quote, experienced fungi forager, which, again, back to our listener, who I'll keep anonymous since I didn't get express permission to use this conversation or to name them. It seems from interacting with folks from Australia, I think you guys might have as well, this is very common. A lot of people are experienced foragers. This is a very different ecosystem than we're used to here. A lot of things that flourish. A lot of people that live there are a bit closer to nature than we are here in the States. I think just in general, but maybe I'm generalizing there, but it does seem from the few people that I have encountered, and have relationships with in Australia, that they do have a lot of, naturalists, just kind of like, hobby hobby level kind of naturalists there. So I don't know, y'all. This is all very interesting. Thank you to our listener who for the pictures and and then also just for opening. I hadn't thought of the story, and I just wanted to follow up and look. And it turns out these are very new. These are from just a couple of days ago. A lot of these updates. So thank you for reminding us of the story and giving us a chance to kind of look at some of the new info. But what do y'all think? This really doesn't look good for Patterson at all.
Certainly not.
As we've kind of alluded to in previous conversations, the news and the stories that we hear, they don't stop just because mass media isn't reporting them in your neck of the global woods. I have a running folder where I keep track on, oh God, I hoard information the way that like RPG video games make you hoard items. And so we follow up on all this stuff. And we really appreciate it because again, if you are listening to this, you specifically, you are the source of some of the best information, some of the best inspiration we get. So thank you, Anonymous on Instagram. Because this touches on so much stuff. And like Noel, to your point, this is still actively developing. There is going to be more that comes out in this case. And I think it is worth our time collectively, to take a look at it. And I really appreciate that point. And it's a point that I think more people should be saying in the public sphere. The court of public opinion is not a court of law. And if this person was involved in no sort of malevolent activities, then it is deeply traumatic and unclean to subject them to baseless accusations. Now, if it turns out that there was homicide afoot, then that is for investigators to decide. I just wanted to give some space and say that I really appreciate that point. I think it's mission critical.
Agreed. And nothing really to add because it's just, these are just, this is being reported and we're just talking about it. And it does feel as though the investigation will yield some results, whether this woman is exonerated or something else. And we'll keep an eye on it and check back in. But I think that's all we got today for this one. Let's take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsor, and then come back with another message from you.
And we have returned, folks. Went a little hard earlier this week on the mysterious plane crash out there in Russia. Shout out to our pal, Jake Hanrahan. Excellent timing, Jake, on making a show called Sad Oligarch. So I thought for this little break in the middle, we'd do one of our favorite things about our weekly listener mail segment, which is, letters from home. How are things going in your neck of the woods? So we've got 3 pretty brief ones that are not related to mysterious deaths in Russia because I've been deep in that world. Thank you to everybody who reached out on Twitter and Instagram. We understand when it is necessary. I understand when it's necessary to protect your identity as best as possible. But thank you for the insights and stay safe out there, folks. Here are some things that are a little bit lighter. We are always grateful for clarifications, for help with corrections. You're not just helping us, you're helping everybody who is a part of this show. Let's start with a cool clarification from Concerned Redneck. Now we've got a lot of friends and fellow conspiracy realists out in Australia, as we know, right? And we got this really cool clarification. I'm just going to read it, and then let's hear the response, because I'll need your help, Matt and Noel, to figure out whether this is real. Concerned Redneck says, "Hey guys, I've been listening to some backlog episodes, and I regularly hear you equate chavs, bogans, and rednecks. Bogans and rednecks are similar enough, but a chav is most definitely not in that category. Chavs, CHAVS, are usually urban, low income, and most likely criminals. Chav literally stands for," wait for it, council, house, and violent. The closest U.S. comparison to chav would be hood rat. Sincerely, concerned redneck. Now, I don't know if that's true. I didn't even want to check yet. I wanted to ask you guys, does it sound plausible?
Well, council housing is, there's also, I think they refer to them in the UK as council flats as well. And I think here we would maybe refer to them as projects.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, obviously those terms have connotations in whatever country and oftentimes are used derogatorily, let's just say. But I think it's similar vibe.
It sounds like something that could be easily racially charged.
That's what I was getting.
Right? Or used by someone in a negative way.
Okay, so I wanted to do this while we're all here together, folks. Just looked it up on my browser of choice, and apparently the term chav is not an acronym for anything. So maybe it's like the old factoid, meaning something that sounds true that isn't. That's always bandied about with the word right? Fornication under consent of the king.
I'm sorry.
That's not true.
I've never heard that one. That's amazing. That does seem to get applied to other things too. You know, I'm hard pressed to think of another one, but I know I've run into things where like, that's definitely an acronym, and people just say it like it's true. And then it's just easy to believe because usually it's sort of a silly sounding word too, like a kind of a made up sounding word.
Yeah. And I just thought that was interesting. As everybody knows, we have all wanted to visit the land of Oz for quite some time. We want to go to Australia, and we're just very fortunate to be able to learn from people who actually live in the area. But let us know if you have ever heard the idea of this word, this term, as an acronym, and let us know the etymology from your perspective. So we appreciate your help, and also clearly we are not fans of weaponizing language in a derogatory way toward any demographic. Living here in the South, we don't see redneck as a derogatory term. You know what I mean? And we have to understand that Talib Kweli was right when he said, I learned words have power. Now I'm careful how I use them. But also tell us your favorite weird acronyms. Moving on. This is a big one. Okay. I'm going fast because I want to get through a few of these. But we had a fascinating conversation about the concept of smoking wet a little while back. Right. And I listened to it and I thought we were just incredibly wholesome. And clearly we are not actively smoking wet, but the unique position of drugs and illicit substances in the U.S. and abroad, it's a continuing subject of conspiracy theory and real-life conspiracies. So, thankfully, we had an anonymous source reach out to us. We asked for your help, and you came through, folks. Here's what we got. No, we're protecting this person's identity, of course. Fellow conspiracy realist, longtime listener, first-time caller. I was listening to your most recent episode about aspartame, and you all went off on a short aside about PCP/formaldehyde/embalming fluid, etc. I'm reaching out to you about that. I am not an absolute expert. However, since the age of a I know all about drugs teen, certain myths about drugs have always irked me, even myths about the harder stuff. And in my early 40s, I sometimes find myself being irked when I hear these myths still floating around. Ha ha, ha ha. So I'm going to put on my know-it-all hat here for a minute. Though I might be wrong, I'll never admit to it. And here this anonymous person goes. The idea of literally smoking formaldehyde or embalming fluid is a conflation of those two things being two of the many street names for PCP. And these two street names for PCP have been around since the 1970s. Well, anonymous, you said just 70s, but I assume 1970s. Who knows? So Anonymous says, though I am not a chemist, I believe the conflation comes due to formaldehyde being used in the processing of PCP in clandestine labs. I don't know if it's a precursor or if it's used in post-production somehow, but further conflation likely comes from formaldehyde being used in embalming fluid. Not that it is impossible that someone somewhere in the history of mankind has tried to literally smoke something dipped in embalming fluid and or formaldehyde without PCP being involved. Maybe the motive in doing so was these hypothetical people couldn't obtain PCP, or they were scared to try actual PCP, but in either case, they somehow had access to either formaldehyde or embalming fluid and were willing to try that. Then, in this hypothetical situation, I think the results of smoking either alone, but not actual PCP, would likely be becoming rather sick, or worse, respiratory failure, death, etc., instead of getting high. So that's the PSA, kids. Formaldehyde and embalming fluid are just street names for PCP. If you are obtaining cigarettes or joints purportedly dipped in either and smoking them, you're likely smoking PCP and not literal formaldehyde. And ends with a little more of a PSA. The important part we want to say here is don't do it.
Drugs.
Yeah. Don't try to smoke formaldehyde, and also don't try actual PCP for that matter. Thank you, Anonymous. What do you guys think? I feel like that's a good thing to get out in the world.
I had an image of someone who's aware that they're near their death, right? They're on their deathbed and they're near it, and they're like, got to start loading up on formaldehyde, preload, pregame this thing, and just start smoking it. Sorry, that's so horrible.
I think I mentioned when we were talking about this before that I was made aware of this by an episode of the fantastic HBO series 6 Feet Under, about a family that runs a mortuary.
Mortuary.
Yeah. And there is an episode where this kind of like crappy boyfriend of one of the characters is found to have been stealing formaldehyde, and they find out because like his friend who like smoked this joint that he'd been selling these joints like dipped in it, like had a freak out meltdown. But it's funny because what we do know about the effects of PCP, he was acting like he was on PCP, but definitely the plot is that it was embalming fluid. So that's the show, playing into that kind of myth as well, and possibly a reason that it's still around. And I think we both looked it up, and even at the time, and it was sort of interchangeably referred to as embalming fluid or PCP or both. Very, very interesting, these kinds of terms, and just the lore that gets wrapped up in like drug culture, and like.
Sure. We've done our duty here. Please don't smoke PCP. There are other things you can do with your time, and there are more interesting pursuits.
I thought you were making a joke about our next listener.
That there are interesting things you can do with your time. I love that, Matt. Also, with that being said, if you have a crazy drug story, first, we hope you are healthy. We hope you have survived, and we cannot wait to hear it. So send it in, 1-833-STDWYTK, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com. We're going to end this part with one last one. We've been getting some great billionaire pranks. A while back, we asked you what you would do if you just had $1.8 billion of goodbye money. How would you practice discord in the world, right? I'm referencing Discordianism and the Illuminatus trilogy. So how would you do it? Well, we got a great, I'm not even going to share our fellow listeners' name here because they have a couple of cool pitches. And this hopefully will just give us a laugh in these dark times. Our anonymous, soon-to-be billionaire says, billionaire pranks. I would change my name to something crazy. Mr. Poo-poo-pee-pee Hands. Or
I think there's a boat named that in the UK. Wait, no, that was clear.
And then says, okay, maybe not Mr. Hands, or government cheese, or questionable milk, etc. And then I would go and fund a bunch of public works and put my name on everything. I can see it now. Questionable milk, palliative care. Government Cheese Public Library, the Mr. Hands Equestrian and Emergency Care.
Oh, that's fun.
That's a brilliant idea, right?
It's a great way. It is very Bodie McBoatface in spirit, where like they shouldn't have opened that up to the public because people are gonna prank, and the stupidest name is gonna rise to the top. And now you got that on your ship. This is smart. I like it.
I mean, I love the idea of going to one of the world's most prestigious universities and funding, the construction of a new library, or there's a new wing somewhere in the ivory tower, and everybody has to call it like the Slippy McDurpin's, memorial planetarium.
I'd go with secret first name, last name Illuminati. So it'd be like the secret Illuminati Equestrian and Emergency Care Center.
That's great. We love these weird names. So thank you for the billionaire pranks, folks. Thank you, as always, for the clarifications and explanations. They are immensely helpful. We can't wait to hear more. We love it. We mentioned this earlier. We love it every time somebody writes in with a cool nickname, bonus points for a pun, or a weird moniker. So keep them coming. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and then we're going to be back with some more messages from you.
Okay, guys, we're back to the phone lines. We got a message here from Nightshift, and I guess I'll just set it up this way. It's kind of a harrowing story. Nightshift, I'll let Nightshift introduce like why this person's writing to us about this topic, but as soon as we're done, like as soon as we're finished, I just want to hear y'all's thoughts on the story, because it's a story that we're being told. Here we go.
Hey guys, you can call me Nightshift. So I grew up in a Christian church, and I went to a Christian school. Since then, I've gone pretty far in the other direction. I don't really say that I believe in God. I'm not sure. I can't. It's hard to say. I guess I'm agnostic. Don't know. But here's an experience that I had. I was just listening to the Divine Visitation portion of the listener mail segment, and I had an experience just out of high school. Me and 3 other friends going to get into the car. We all called shotgun. I won it, but my buddy insisted that he sit in the passenger seat. No big deal. I sit in the back seat. We are driving ridiculously fast on the highway. I got this weird sensation, and I heard somebody in my head tell me to buckle my seatbelt. So I did. Somebody cuts us off, and we crash. I put on my seatbelt 30 seconds before we crashed. While we were rolling, this was a hatchback, and the rear window actually ended above my head. So while we were rolling, the ground was where my head would touch. It felt like there was a giant hand cupping the back of my head. I walked out of there with no bruises, no nothing. The friend, unfortunately, that was in the passenger seat, he went out the window when we were rolling. The car landed on top of him. Horrible story. He did not make it. Terrible situation. But I completely heard the voice and felt the hand on the back of my head. I just wanted to share this with you guys. Once again, this is Nightshift. I've been listening to you guys since the beginning. Love it. All right. Have a good one. Bye.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Pretty intense. Yeah.
Like Churchill. Thank you, Nightshift.
Man, I mean, okay, so I talked to Nightshift, and I'll give you guys some more details here, but just first of all, after hearing that, the inner voice or exterior voice that tells you you should put your seatbelt on when you're traveling down the road at, upwards of 100 miles per hour, that's the first thing I want to analyze, because to me, that's almost your... not to put anything, not to lighten what you felt or what you think you experienced there, Nightshift, but for me, that would be my internal voice, whatever that, subconscious thing is that's, yells at me sometimes like, dude, don't do that. It would be saying, put on your seatbelt, dude. So like for me, I don't know. What do you guys think? For me, that wouldn't require any kind of exterior influence.
Honestly, so this is fascinating. We do know that throughout human history, some luminaries, brilliant people have experienced what modern science often typifies as auditory hallucinations, right? And hearing voices. And I want to shout out again one of our a really good episode, one that's close to my heart, with what passes for my heart, with Joe McCormick, the bicameral mind, right? The idea that in the past, people may not have had internal monologues. And indeed, it's interesting that even now there are people who have entered studies and they don't have an internal monologue. So maybe when a thought occurs, this feels like a message from the exterior, but also, you can't devalue an experience like this, because regardless of how somebody wants to attempt to explain it, it saved your life, dude.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
But what also saved his life was not hitting his head. As that it's a tiny little Mazda MX-3, like 1995.
Okay.
If you look those up, or if you know what those are, it's a tiny little car. It looks like a little mini sports car. And that hatchback window that Nightshift is referring to really does, if you're sitting in the back seat, comes right over your head.
It's a crazy slope. Yeah.
Their vehicle was traveling upwards of 140 miles per hour, 147 miles per hour when they crashed. This is after I talked to Nightshift. That vehicle rolled on the highway, traveling at that speed 8 times. And he's not a super tall guy, like an overly tall person, but his head, theoretically, even if he's strapped into his seatbelt, would have been slamming into the ground as it's rolling over. And Nightshift, I'll give you the words from the phone call we had together. It felt exactly like a hand, like a warm hand wrapping around the top of my head that was like shielding him while that was occurring.
Question, Matt, and question for you as well, Nightshift, if you want to reach back out and give us some more information here. Did Nightshift, did you guys talk about whether or not this person had any additional similar experiences, either before or after the crash?
No additional experiences like that. However, Nightshift and his significant other are very interested in watching TV shows about feeling spirits, ghosts, entities, that kind of thing. Like specifically focused on the touch sensation when it comes to otherworldly encounters like that.
Also, shout out Gavin DeBecker, The Gift of Fear. Can't recommend that book enough. You know what I mean? Sometimes those hunches can save your life.
Right? Certainly, I don't know, man, just a very strange version of this. And Nightshift, guys, invites us to around where his neck of the woods is. There's a thing out there called the America's Stonehenge that I believe we've talked about internally and mentioned on the show before.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, pretty cool.
We're crashing at your house, man.
Yeah.
Did I tell you guys that I got cut from William Shatner's Unexplained, talking about the Georgia Guidestones?
Oh, no.
I think they pivoted the whole episode because there just wasn't enough about it. I think they thought there was going to be enough to fill a whole episode, but the episode that came out in the new season is just about like national monuments. So I kind of have a feeling that they just changed direction entirely. But they gave me my per diem. It was just fun. I was like, yeah, I want to see you. Oh, man.
Oh, darn. I'm sorry, man. That would have been exciting.
It wouldn't have been.
That's Willie's loss.
We could have had a whole conversation about his side business, or at least association to a side business, about the DNA sending crystals to the moon and all that. You seen that? Did we talk about that on the air?
No.
Okay. Apparently,
You're talking about William Shatner?
Yeah, William Shatner. Apparently, he's like partnered in some way for the promotion, or partnered with the company itself. Something about crystals. I can't remember the name of it, but they form crystals and in some way infuse your DNA, and they're going to send it to the moon. and it only costs $150,000 to do it.
Sign me up.
What? Yeah. Let's use all our podcast riches. That's the new billionaire prank. He probably heard our episode. It was like DNA to the moon.
That
That's
sounds
my
like a
thing.
more high-tech version of what Hunter S. Thompson did, where he had his ashes like fired out of a cannon. You know,
Yeah.
that was a lot cheaper, I think, but still not cheap. Johnny Depp paid for it apparently, but it did happen.
Also, Hunter S. Thompson, amazing writer. Just got to say, Gonzo journalism is beautiful, but maybe not the best person. When you
Johnny
see
Depp seemed to like him. He seems
when you
to
see your
have
heroes
modeled
up
his life
close.
after him. Yeah.
The program is called Immortalize Me. Williams
No.
program.
It's
Isn't
called
it?
It's called Space Crystals. Wait, maybe it is called Immortalize Me.
Space
Hold on.
Crystals is way better, though. Come on, can we all agree?
Space Crystals is cool. It's like space law. You know what I mean?
The
Or
one
Space Force.
The one I found has if you go to myspacecrystals.com, you can see William Shatner, and it has a quote. It says, "I'm going to put your DNA on the moon. It's crazy. You will put your DNA in the capsule. That capsule will go to the moon and stay there alongside Neil Armstrong's footsteps. Here we have the possibility of a type of immortality."
Hey, I'm not going to have anybody hate on Captain Kirk on my watch. You know,
I'm not hating on him.
Star Trek and Gene Roddenberry. I know you're not. And just to clarify for everyone, Matt is correct. The name of the company is Space Crystals LLC. I think they're out of Texas, and their program under that company is Immortalize Me.
Can we point out though that URL is MySpace
Crystals.com.
Oh, well done. Yeah. That's great. I love it.
All right. Thanks so much, Nightshift, for sending us that message. We're going to jump to one more message from a familiar voice, a familiar person in our email, someone who writes to us constantly. Mr. Brockness Monster. Here we go.
Hey guys, the Brockness Monster. I was listening to the UFOs and aliens in Congress episode earlier. The situation where there was the sighting where a couple jets flew past a sphere that had a square inside of it, a box inside of it. That just sounds a lot like a radar reflector. I think it is.
Okay, we're going to pause right here in between the message. Guys, I had no idea what a radar reflector is. I don't know how this didn't hit my radar in 40 years, but it never did. Do you guys know what a radar reflector is?
We talked about this a little bit off air. I didn't, but I made some guesses. I haven't looked it up. I'm very interested to see whether these are correct. What about you, Noel?
No. I didn't know, and I said I didn't want to know because I like to be surprised.
All right, well, surprise. This is from westmarine.com. I'm going to read directly from it. It says, what radar reflectors do. Radar reflectors, more accurately called radar target enhancers or RTEs, reflect radar energy from other vessels' radars so that your boat, if you've got one of these on it, shows up as a larger and more consistent target.
Yes. All right, cool. I feel so validated. Okay, so it's a safety thing, right?
Yeah.
A radar reflector? Okay.
Imagine you're on a small vessel and you're operating out on the ocean where there are much larger vessels that are they're just barreling through, and there's not much they can do to change their trajectory unless they get, early warning. If you've got one of these on your boat, they're going to see you, or you're at least ensuring there's a larger probability that they're going to see you and not hit you, hopefully.
So electronically, it's like a mobile lighthouse, right?
Yeah, it's a lot like a mobile lighthouse. But there are lots of uses for this technology. It's not just for ships, small boats, and that kind of thing. The whole point is that it puts off a large radar signature. And depending on the size that you build them, you can make it a huge radar signature, right? You could do all kinds of stuff with it. And you can maybe imagine, guys, in your head, there are other military applications for a device like this, right? Let's think about that, and let's jump back in and finish Brock's message here.
I'm imagining a situation where the two jets flew past a radar reflector. That would be a really good explanation for that, because I can't think of any other reason why you would need a box inside a sphere, because that's ridiculous. But I'm not like a alien spaceship designer, so what do I know? Yeah, just looking for the simplest explanation for some of this weird stuff that's happening. And sounds like a radar reflector. There you go. Problem solved. Or whatever. Later.
Love his energy.
Brock, I love it, man, because we talk about this a lot when we're just hanging out, when we're off air. The simpler explanations will often have a higher likelihood of being true.
Right? That we just talked about that when we were discussing Prigozhin. Y'all, I just put something in the chat. Please do look at that if you have a second, because when we're talking about what these radar reflectors look like, often you will see varying shapes, some that look like pyramids, some that look like almost a sphere in a way, but others look like a box or almost a star shape inside an inflatable, clear sphere or rounded shape.
And they're inflatable too, which is fascinating.
Not all of them are inflatable. Some of them are for various uses, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a possibility here that Brock Ness is onto something. I don't know if it's the most simple thing, because you'd think, somebody like Ryan Graves, who had a sighting of one of these, and other pilots, that were just like him, visibly seeing these things, you'd think they would know what a radar reflector was. My question is,
so do you fly these like balloons, kind of?
Now there's the big question, okay?
Right.
I don't think you fly these like balloons. I've never seen any evidence of them being flown like balloons. I've seen them attached to the ends of a large inflatable balloon, because there's metal in there inside the reflector itself. There are electronic components sometimes, it looks like, maybe not always, but it would require some serious lift to get it off the ground, especially to have it, hovering in the air thousands of feet above sea level where those pilots were operating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another immediate question. Like, first off, obviously, this will remind a lot of us playing along at home about the Chinese balloons. They're totally not spy balloons. That one of the immediate questions I think a lot of us will have on our minds here is, what is the efficacy of size? Like, what Graves reported is pretty big. So would there be an advantage to having a very large inflatable radar reflector? I don't know enough about the science.
This Ryan Graves' story was that it was the entry point to the operating area, right? Which maybe it was an attempt to mark the entry point to the operating area with a small device that would be easily pinged by radar, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I brought this up last time we talked about something like this, and I do it every time. I saw a thing, and it looked like one of these, but it would have had to be really big. And it was in a part of the country where the land is really flat, so your line of sight on the horizon or whatever is probably a little distorted. But I saw, like, in the distance, a thing that looked a whole lot like one of these, but it would have to have been at a massive scale to be able to see it from that far away. I think that's what you're getting at, Ben. Like, these are, I'm seeing them hoisted up onto a ship's sail. And they're not tiny, but they're not small, but they're not like massive. You wouldn't be able to see one of these from from miles away, or from even, hundreds and hundreds of meters away.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to see the types of radar reflectors that you can currently purchase online. That's right. Right.
But then, to Ben's point, is there any increased efficacy to having large ones? And I think the answer is we don't know. We certainly don't see them for sale, which seems... I don't see any reason why, if they were helpful, they wouldn't exist for sale.
True. Yeah, and also there are different shapes, right? Like,
yes.
They're not all orbs. Some, I'm just seeing some appear to be tubes.
Yes.
Cylindrical.
There are all kinds of different shapes.
Diamond is what I
tic-tac.
saw.
Tic-tac shapes, in fact.
That's,
I mean, right? I mean, it's weird. Look, this is weird, guys. We got to get out of here in a second, but I shared a link to thedrive.com. There's an article here from, oh gosh, I think it was last year, December 2022. It's, who knows, but it's a story about China using these in military drills for specific purposes. But it's not to call attention to a vessel or a strategic location. It's to confuse enemy radar about what is at a certain location, strategic targets at a location. So you can put these up, and if you're looking at it on radar from a 40,000 foot view, right, an overview of a battlefield or something, it's going to look like there's other stuff going on in that area, and it's not, maybe other buildings even, depending on the configuration that you're putting out there. Or in the case of Russia's military, there are other reports in here about making a fake bridge using radar reflectors in strategically placed, so it looks as though there's actually a structure that's built there. I don't know. It feels like militaries could make use of these in intriguing and innovative ways. I just don't know all those ways.
Makes sense. Bleed out the enemy's resources, right? If they want to blow up bridges so bad, give them some pretend bridges.
Yeah. And these are fairly cheap to make pieces of metal. That's what a radar reflector is. At least the most unsophisticated kind. So who knows? I do not think, and I have to say this, Brock, I do not think that thing that Ryan Graves and those pilots saw is this specific thing, because I personally don't think it would be floating like that unless it was tethered to a balloon that was much higher in the sky than Ryan Graves and those guys could see, right? Because it could be like one of those mines. Remember we talked about one of the episode, the mines that were attached to a weather balloon, and it was designed to have a pilot fly through the tether and then get bombed.
Caught. Yeah.
I mean, it could be something like that, but why in the heck would the military have one of those in an operating area for military drills?
This is why we need to get our pilot licenses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm so serious. Noel and I were talking about this off air. What was it? It was yesterday, Noel. And I got called on the spot about giving a timeline to this. So let's just say it publicly. I don't want us to be in a situation where we need to get in the sky and we don't know. None of us knows how to fly a plane. Helicopters are going to be too complicated for me. That's on someone else. But by August next year, I just want to put it out there. I'm going to hopefully have a pilot license. Yeah. Well, I'm also going to be broke from trying to get a pilot license. So,
well, good luck to you, sir.
Indeed.
Well, if you guys if you guys pay for lunch, then maybe we can get in the plane. But yeah, it is fascinating. Radar reflectors. I had no idea that was a thing.
Me neither.
Look up pictures of them. They're weird. Thanks so much, Brock. Thanks so much, Nightshift.
Big thanks, of course, to Anonymous. Big thanks to Mr. Poo-poo-pee-pee Hands. And big thanks again to everyone who has written in the past. Big thanks to all of us who are going to join the show in the future.
Indeed. And if you'd like to join the show in the form of conversation, by writing in to be included in one of these weekly listener mail episodes, you can do so by reaching out to us on various social media platforms, including the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, YouTube, and also Facebook, where you can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
If you want to be like Brock Ness Monster and Nightshift, why not call 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a voicemail system. You got 3 minutes. Please give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your message and voice in one of our listener mail episodes. If you got more to say than can fit in those 3 minutes, you got links, you got pictures, you got anything, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.